Good morning, cadets. This is Sergeant Jessa B. Helbulario, and I am a graduate military assistant. And today we will be tackling about forward observer and introduction to armor operations. So to begin with, let us define what is a forward observer. So this team is composed of trained forward observers or subordinate leaders themselves. They serve as the eyes and ears of a gunnery team. They locate the target, makes the call for the fire to the fire direction center, which receives the fire request, make necessary computations, and give orders to the firing element. And they also adjust fires if necessary. And lastly, they conduct surveillance of fire for effect. Okay, the definition of terms. Target acquisition. This involves detecting suitable targets and determine their ground location. Adjustment of fires. These are necessary to obtain effective fire on the target when the accuracy of the battle or location data is questionable. Third is the surveillance of fire effect. So since the observer can see the target, he can direct fire and report its effect to the fire direction center. And the fourth one is the battlefield surveillance. So this is very important product of artillery observation because observation must report all information about the enemy activity and must use the following acronym. Salute, which means size, activity, location, unit, equipment. Okay, so the next is these observed fire procedure. So this is the method of requesting and adjusting observed indirect fires such that it will hit the target. Okay, so the fire support gunnery team. So the first one is the forward observer. We had already discussed this earlier. And let's now just proceed to the fire direction center. So the fire direction center, it serves as the nerve and brain of the gunnery team. So they receive the fire request, make necessary computations, and give orders to the firing element. So now the firing element, they act as the muscles, the arms, and legs of the gunnery team. So they receive orders from the fire direction center and they carry out necessary corrections on the support weapon as directed. So now let's proceed to the next slide. So what are the methods of locating targets? So we have three methods in locating targets. The first one is the grid coordinates method, wherein the observer gives the grid coordinate location of the target to the nearest 10 meters or 8 digits and the direction of the target as viewed from his position. So the second one is the polar plot method. This is used when the observer and the target are on different elevation. So the observer locating the target gives the three elements distance. So from his position to the target, direction, and vertical interval between his position and that of the target. And the last method of locating targets is this shift from a known point. So this method, the observer gives the location of the target based from a known point. So this could be a prominent terrain feature, previous targets, or anything identifiable both on the man and the ground. So this method involves the following elements: the direction, lateral shift, ranges shift, and vertical interval. Okay, so the accuracies and announcement of data. So the observer will normally round off and announce his data as follows. So first, the direction to the nearest 10 miles. Second is the deviation to the nearest 10 meters. Third is vertical change to the nearest 5 meters. Fourth is through grid coordinates to the nearest 10 meters. Okay, so how they measure angles. So they measure angles they measure angles through measuring devices, through aiming circle, the BS scope, or through binoculars, and through the use of hands and fingers. So for one finger, the point finger, that is equivalent to 30 meters. For two fingers, the point and middle finger, that is equivalent to 70 meters. For the three fingers, the pointer, middle, and the ring, that is equivalent to 100 meters. And for the four fingers, excluding the thumb, that is equivalent to 125 meters. And the closed fist, that is equal to 180 meters. So next is call for fire. So call for fire is a clear, concise, formatted message sent by the observer to the FDC or the Fire Direction Center that includes all of the information the FDC needs to engage the target. It is a request, not an order. It must be understood, recorded, and read back without error by the FDC. The normal call for fire has 6 elements and is transmitted in maximum of 3 parts with a break and a read back after each part. Okay, so the first element, that is the identification. So identification is the most important element in a request for fire. This establishes first contact with the fire direction center. The second we have is warning. This gives notice that all transmission should be given priority. It is preliminary orders sent by the observer to alert the FDC that he is requesting for artillery fires. The third element is the target location. So this is the location of the target in any manner described earlier. The fourth element is the target description. This is the nature of the target. And the fifth element is the type of engagement. These may or may not be omitted. This includes the fuse setting desired, type of projectile to be used, and the special way to engage the target. And for the last element for call for fire is the method of fire and control. So in this last element, the observer must decide whether to adjust fire or fire for effect.
So, good morning. My name is Sergeant Leiros B. Junaldo. I am a graduate military assistant for Suleiman University ROTC unit. So, today we will talk about the introduction of armor operations. Introduction of armor operations. So, an armor operates normally within a force structure that may include tanks, infantry, mechanized infantry, artillery, engineers, armored cavalry, and army aviation, which includes some use of the trucks, tanks, the armored vehicles, light armored vehicles, and helicopters to support on the battlefield by a flexible and rapid communication system and a mobile logistics system. So the armor conducts decisive mobile, ground environmental warfare. They are commonly used for offensive and is characterized by a predominance of mounted combat through the use of both and air vehicles. So armor units fight normally as combined armed forces of two or more arms, each completing the other, aiding for the forward movement of the force by employing its own special capabilities. So an armored vehicle is any vehicle, wheeled or tracked, designed especially for the use in combat, integrating mobility, firepower, and armor protection. So an ambush site, any portions of the route that affords advantages for waiting enemies such as a concealment or cover, fields of fire, observation of and avenues of approach and withdrawals. A critical area is where the majority of the enemy influenced barangays or where the NPA is actually actively present. So this is the area where terrorism is rampant, and there is the existence of conflict between the government forces and the enemy troops. So, the characteristics of an armor. So, of course, number one is the armor protection. It is designed to keep the crew, the weapons, and the passengers safe while inflicting punishment upon the enemy. Second is the firepower capabilities. So an armor must sometimes have or most have machine guns, mortars, howitzers, and tank guns, particularly suited for destructive fire against hard and pinpointed targets, quick fire and particular target, and a fixed line during darkness. The third characteristic of an armor is a mobility. So, tracked vehicles enables armored units to move at high speed on roads and trails and have excellent cross-country mobility. And of course, number four, flexibility, which is complemented by mobility, which enables a commander to concentrate and to switch firepower on the battlefield. It results from the ability to reach immediately to orders passed by ratio. So a mobile can actually switch from one offense to another due to its flexibility. So if they're getting attacked from one side and then they were able to neutralize the another threat will be addressed through to the flexibility of the armor. Intensive and flexible communication. Of course, the entire communication structure is designed to facilitate command and control. So no one will be left behind since communication is already in the system of a armored unit. Of course, shock action. Of course, a shock, which means to rattle or to strike fear to the enemy, is provided by the tanks. Its shock effects of the tanks depend on the strike achieved by speed and mobility. And upon use of tanks and guns and effective ranges, and upon closing with the enemy. So the enemy troops will be somehow crippled with fear since they are facing the armor and they do not have anything to counter it. So types of armor units and mission. Tank units are used to close with and destroy enemy forces by the means of fire, maneuver, shock effect, in coordination with other arms. Mechanized infantry are used to close with the enemy using firing maneuver, to destroy or capture, or to repel any assaults by close combat or counterattack. And lastly, the cavalry units or the light armor units, which is to provide security, perform reconnaissance, and engage in offensive, defensive, and delay operations as an economy of the force unit. Capabilities and limitations. Of course, the capabilities of a armor unit is to conduct operations requiring a high degree of firepower, mobility, and armor protection. Of course, the attack or defense under hostile fire and during limited visibility conditions. The third is to destroy the enemy mounted or dismounted, to command and control attached mechanized infantry, and of course to participate in amphibious operations. So the first limitation of a armored vehicle is of course the limited maneuverability in built-up areas, wooden and rugged terrains, especially in cities or sieges. Number two is vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and mines. The third is to slow speed in crossing water obstacles, especially if the river is too deep and if the armor is not built for amphibious assaults. The fourth is difficulty identifying enemy infantry and AT gunners in close terrain. And lastly, the limited supply of fuel in extended operation. Armored vehicles of the Philippine Army. So this is an armored personnel carrier, commonly known as an APC tank. The crew is a driver, a commander, and 11 passengers. The armaments of an armored personnel tank is a primary 50 caliber mounted in the top, and the secondary is two 7.62 millimeter weapon, and the maximum effective range of this is a 1,100 meters, and the maximum range of the weapons are in 3,725 meters. So this is a Scorpion tank, primarily used for combat and reconnaissance unit. This is drive by tracks, and the difference between an APC tank and a Scorpion tank is that APC tanks does carry passengers while Scorpion tanks does not. So as you can see, a combat Scorpion tank only has 3 people on it: the gunner, the driver, and the commander. And of course, you can see the armament, which is a 76 millimeter cannon, followed by other smoke grenade dischargers on this side of the tanks. So this is an example of a Scorpion tank. Unlike the other photo, it is actually using the wheel type, since it is somehow used in a rocky and a urban type operations. Lastly, the Simba armored fighting vehicle, which is commonly used by the Philippine Army since it both covers offense and defense, since it has a 50 millimeter gun on top of it and a smoke grenade launcher on the side. It can also accommodate 8 to 10 infantrymen for transport, and is commonly manned by a gunner, a crew, a driver, and the commander.
Good morning, cadets. I am Sergeant Alkaiser Warad, and I will be answering some of your questions on forward observers and introduction to armor operations. Out of the three methods, which is the most accurate and effective way of locating a target? So, the most accurate and effective way of locating a target is to shift from a known point. How can a forward observer be able to protect themselves knowing the possible dangers they will be facing in combat? In the first place, they should be able to know that they will be facing dangers in all of their missions, and they should be prepared for the worst case scenarios. How necessary is it to have a forward observer? The forward observer serves as the eyes and ears of the gunnery team. They locate the target, makes the call for the fire to the fire direction center, which receives the fire request, make necessary computations, and give orders to the firing element. They also adjust fire if necessary and conduct surveillance of fire for effect. What is the most used armor vehicle by Philippine Army? The Simba armored vehicle is commonly used in urban and rural operations to mobilize troops safely from one place to another and to deliver such firepower for operations. Why do some tanks use tracks than tires? Do wheels make them really faster? So this is for mobility to harsh terrain and protection from punctures. The Philippine Army did not adopt such tracks systems to light armor vehicles since speed is the key for their operations, and the armored vehicle does not conduct operation through harsh terrain. That is why we have the battery team. How do armor operations in the battlefield ensure that civilians around the area are not hit by the counterattack? Armor operation is offensive in nature. Thus, it ensures that any further damage in the surrounding battlefield will be lessened. It provides the full safety of the civilians against any attacks from the opposing side. What are the most frequent issues that the troops encounter during armor operations, and how do they cope with the issues? One of the most frequent issues that they encounter is limited maneuverability in rugged terrain and sometimes in forests. It also moves slowly when crossing water obstacles. So that would be it for the recap of the forward observers and the introduction to armor operations. I hope you have learned a lot from our lecture, and if you have questions in mind or any clarification, you may message or contact your assigned officer and instructor. God bless everyone.